Hi, hello, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for March 2021. And it's the first short fiction roundup that is appearing here on my new website / reading blog, Maria's Reading. Starting with this March roundup, all my monthly roundups will be published here at this website. There's a link in the description. So I've brought over all my roundups that were previously published on my blog and at Curious Fictions, and they're all finally here together in one place. I started writing short fiction roundups for my blog in 2016, so there was a lot of content to bring over. And in 2018 and 2019, when I still wrote for BNN's now defunct Sci-Fi and Fantasy blog, I put together 2 roundups each month, one for BNN and one for my blog. And the BNN roundups are still available on the BNN website, but I have provided links to them from Maria's Reading. Currently, of course, I'm proud to be part of the Strange Horizons team, writing a quarterly short fiction roundup for them called Short Fiction Treasures, and links to those columns are available here on this site. When BNN shut down in 2019, I brought my monthly roundup over to Curious Fictions, partly because I didn't have the mind space or the time at that point to make a new home for the roundups, and partly because Curious Fictions is an awesome site, has a great interface for both writers and readers. I will still be posting at Curious Fictions, so you can check me out there too. This month, I'd also like to shout a little bit before I get into the roundup about a new speculative fiction zine that is running a Kickstarter campaign. The Deadlands is a monthly speculative fiction magazine exploring all aspects of death and the borders it shares with the living. Now, the Deadlands has a fantastic team on board, a fantastic editorial team on board, and a great lineup of writers. And if you, like me, have missed Shimmer, then you should know that Shimmer editor E. Catherine Tobler is the editor of this new zine. So check them out and support them if you can. There's a link in the description for the video. Now, here's this month's roundup. My first story pick is Keeping House by Sarah Day at Pseudopod, narrated by Cat Day. In the story, a young couple are looking for a house. It's going to be their first home as a couple, and while the house they're looking at seems great, the basement, well, in the basement, Lydia feels the presence of something other. She shrugs it off, but after they move in, things get even stranger for Lydia, especially Lydia, who starts to feel consumed by the need to clean, to do her domestic chores, to keep house. This is an awesome horror story with a lot of layers that explores traditional gender roles, the way housework is often seen as a woman's responsibility, and the way marriage and relationships sometimes seem to consume women's other ambitions. My second story pick this month is The Door by Ike Quigley at Flash Fiction Online. Now, this is written as a series of transcribed voicemail messages, and it's a story that is subtle. It's a subtle and dark piece of cosmic horror in flash format. I really love how Quigley captures a growing and unsettling sense of dread in each bit of the story, and I also really love the pivotal role played by the cat. My next story pick is Barefoot and Midnight by Cherie Renee Thomas in Apex. In the story, it starts off with that one night 3 white men burned down the Freedmen's School in Gayoso's Flats. Now, children sleeping inside the school all perish in the fire. After that horrific night, the black community grieves, but one of them, Dusa Dayan, is overcome not only by grief, but by rage, and she goes looking for vengeance. She knows where to go, she knows what to do, and though the price for that vengeance might seem high, it's a price she's willing to pay. This is a gloriously sharp, jagged piece of horror. My next story pick is also from Apex. It's Las Girlfriend's Guide to Subversive Eating by Sabrina Vorvulias, about a trio of middle-aged Latinas from South Philly. Who better than a trio of middle-aged Latinas from South Philly to show you what can bubble up when la gente decide to cook? So this is a terrific, interactive short story about political resistance and food, and I think this marks the first time Apex has published an interactive story. Vorvulias says that Las Girlfriends are also part of the story universe in two of her other stories, Skin in the Game, which was published at Tor.com, and The Life and Times of Johnny the Fox, which was published in an anthology called Knaves that was published by Outland Publications. Now, I really love the subversive sense of humor in the story, and I love its political edge, and the interactive format makes it an especially interesting read. My next story pick is A Cold Yesterday in Late July by David Tollerman in the Dark. Now, after his father's death, the protagonist receives a book of local walks for hikers that his father wanted him to have. He can't quite fathom a reason why his aloof and emotionally distant father insisted he'd have the book, but after the funeral, he decides to follow one of the trails just to clear his head and get some fresh air. On the way, he finds that he experiences this quiet, empty calm, almost like a void that he hasn't really experienced before. And through the following years, he goes on the same hike several more times. Though the protagonist might not notice, there is a change that comes over him as time passes. It's a subtle horror tale with a sense of dread that tickles at the back of your senses right from the start. I love the way the protagonist's change happens quietly and stealthily, and I particularly love how firmly rooted the story is in the landscape and even the changing weather. There's a sense of inevitability here about how our past and our own family history can reach out and hold us fast even when we don't realize it's happening. My next story pick is Spells for Going Forth by Day by V.G. Campen in Metaphorosis. In this story, the Egyptian jackal-headed god Anubis is living in a swamp near New York City. Years ago, when they were children, Grace and her brother Matthew befriended Anubis and have continued to visit him over the years. But now Matthew is in hospital in a coma after an accident. He's not expected to live, and Grace has come to seek help and guidance from Anubis, who has, a lot of knowledge about the underworld. As it turns out, Grace might also be able to help Anubis. I absolutely adore this story, and I adore this depiction of Anubis in exile. And there are several scenes in this story. In particular, there's one inside the museum towards the end that are just stunning, and the ending left me sobbing. There's a gentle but sure wisdom in the way Anubis speaks to Grace about death and grief and letting go. Every dawn is a victory, he says. Remember that, Grace. Every day of life, a triumph over the chaos of night. The title, of course, refers to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, aka Spells for Going Forth by Day. My next story pick is Mouth by Sacha Lapointe in Strange Horizons. And this is an evocative lyrical piece about language and identity, and about how the culture and history of so many indigenous peoples, even their languages, have been stolen, forbidden, buried, and then used for other people's purposes, put on display in museums, studied as if they're dead things. And in this story, even speaking one simple, intimate phrase has tragic repercussions. My next story pick is The Sin of America by Catherine M. Valente in Uncanny Magazine. Valente's story is set in a diner in a regular part of regular America, and it's a story that is both brutal and beautiful. As so often in Valente's work, it's full of lush prose and keenly observed descriptions of the world, people, and food. Also, there is a whole lot of horror lurking beneath the surface here. The twist in the story, once Valente reveals what the eating of sin really entails and what it really means for the person who must consume the feast, reminded me of Shirley Jackson's classic short story, The Lottery. My next story pick is The Dame with the Earth at Her Back by Sarah Pauling at Escape Pod, narrated by Tina Connolly. Now, this story brings together two of my favorite things, an old-school noir vibe and science fiction. Mary Ellen is a stand-up comedian who left the solar system to escape some problems. She found a new planet to hang her coat, but things are not uncomplicated there either, especially when there's espionage and intrigue and maybe even rebellion afoot. This is gripping and entertaining from start to finish and full of wonderful characters. My next story is The Center of the Universe by Nadia Shamas in Strange Horizons. This story is part of Strange Horizons' special Palestinian issue, and it's also one of the best, gutsiest, and most harrowing short stories about virtual reality, identity, politics, and AI that I've read since Rebecca Roanhorse's Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience. I won't spoil the story by saying more, really, but please check out this story and this fantastic issue of Strange Horizons. My next story pick is Studies in Microscopy by Samantha Xiao Cody in Split Lip magazine. And this story has this wonderful line. I began to use my microscope to look at everything that frightened me. It's a uniquely imagined, beautifully told, and wonderfully weird story about fear and love and microscopes, and about finding the courage to look for and to find the things we want even though we're scared. My next story pick is The Tech Workhorse by M.H. Avinde in FIA number 17. Sorry, there was something on my screen I was trying to remove. I haven't stopped thinking about this story since I read it. It takes place in a world where humans are locked in an ongoing battle with a strange people called the Feverborn. In this world, one of the most mysterious and powerful things used in battle are the tech workhorses. It's said that no one but a highborn person can ride them, and they will only bond with a person who manages to speak to them the right way in an old, almost forgotten language. It's a whole mysterious process to this bonding that is really intriguing. Now, when Bola first sees the horses as a child, she's mesmerized. All the horses are claimed by highborns except one, which doesn't seem to work and is left behind in Bola's community. Over the years, as Bola grows and ages and has a child of her own, and as she grows older still, her love for the tech workhorse that no one could awaken remains. And there is a moment in this story, the moment when Bola realizes the truth of what she needs to do, what she always needed to do, that spoke to me on so many levels, as a person, as a mother, as a writer, as a human being. It's a truly outstanding and original work of fiction set in a fascinating world that I would love to see more of. My next story pick is Upland Wildlife by Rhonda Presley Veidt in Black Static, number 78-79. It's a double issue. And it starts off with this wonderful beginning. It says, "Welcome to Normal Valley, home of 250 good normal people," the sign says. 250, more or less, good and normal. more or less. This is a stunningly good tale of horror about two touristing families driving through Normal Valley who happen to stop for a bit of fun horse riding at a seemingly normal farm. It's a trip that comes to a terrifying end. At the farm lives a family that are part of the valley, of its history and landscape, and its folklore and mythology in a profound way that has terrible repercussions for everyone involved. I love the way this story captures the family dynamics at play among children and adults, both among the visitors and the locals. And I love how folklore and old tales are woven into the narrative throughout. There's a steely tension running through the story, and every twist of the plot tightens that tension until the breaking point. My next story pick is If Those Ragged Feet Won't Run by Annie Neugebauer in Apex. It's a really good issue of Apex, I'm just saying. I picked 3 stories from my roundup. Now, this story is set in a world where predatory creatures called nightbirds hunt and kill humans. Humans have learned to run and hide from the creatures, but of course that doesn't always work. As the story begins, a mother and her very young baby are caught in the wilderness, and the mother has to find a way to get back to the safety of her village without getting killed. What makes the story stand out for me is that this mother is dealing with all the issues of recent childbirth, as she has to hide, run, dodge, and fight the monster. There's breastfeeding, a crying baby, getting the baby to latch on the breast. There's bleeding, joint pain, vaginal pain, weak stomach muscles. I don't think I've ever read a story that takes these very real postpartum details and weaves them into a tale. And the result is a tense, taut, breathtaking chase story that had me on the edge of my seat. And the added twist of the tale is when we realize we're dealing with not one but 2 mothers. It really adds to the harrowing brilliance of this story. And my next story pick is The Code for Everything by McKinley Valentine in Fantasy number 65. When we meet Izzy at the beginning of this tale, she has just left a party because she feels overwhelmed by all the social interactions that are difficult for her to interpret and participate in without misunderstandings and frustration and confusion. What happens next leads to a wonderful and unique twist on human interactions with the fairy realm, and on the idea that there are this multitude of intricate rules you must follow in order to not get into trouble with the Fae. It's a wonderfully quirky and darkly funny story. My next story pick is Crazy Beautiful by Kat Rambo in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and it's from the March-April 2021 issue. This is just such a mind-bendingly strange and audacious story about an art-producing artificial intelligence that either goes off the rails or just follows its instructions extremely well, or maybe it's a bit of both. The story is written as a series of emails, transcripts, and other fragments of communication, and deals with an AI that is created in order to create art on its own, including gene art and various forms of biomodification. Now, the AI is given 2 drives for its behavior: to consume art and create it. And one of its creators also included some snippets of theology, because what could go wrong with that, right? Excellent story by Kat Rambo. My next story pick is The Captain and the Quartermaster by C.L. Clarke in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. C.L. Clarke's story puts us into the middle of an army that has been fighting for years trying to win freedom from the reign of the tyrant. After years of warfare, everyone involved is tired, run down, and on the verge of giving up, or at least on the verge of believing that defeat is close at hand. This goes for the two people at the heart of the tale, too, the army's captain and its quartermaster, who have been in a relationship that is as old as the war. In flashbacks, Clarke tells us the story of their relationship and the war, and these two stories are tightly intertwined as their love and the fortunes of war wax and wane and change everyone involved in fundamental ways. I love everything about this story, the wistful, reflective mood of it, and the way it tells a real love story that isn't magically perfect. And I love how it captures the ups and downs of love, life, and war. How good is this short story? Well, I thought it was so good that I immediately went and ordered Clarke's novel, The Unbroken. My next story pick is The 3-Day Hunt by Robert R. Chase in Asimov's January and February 2021 issue. In this story, an American ex-soldier struggling with life after his experiences in Afghanistan finds a strange disc-shaped vessel damaged in a crash near his cabin. Unsure of the origins of the vessel, he sets out to find the presumably injured pilot of the wrecked craft. He's not alone. His dog Tripod, a rescue dog he adopted while overseas, is by his side, helping him track the pilot, whoever they may be, through the wilderness. And while we soon realize that this is a first contact story, the heart of the tale is really the relationship between a man and his dog. And I love how this story explores the profound and unique bond we share with dogs. My final story pick for this month's roundup is Submergence by Arula Ratnakar in Clarke's World. Ratnakar's story is set in a future where humanity has managed to destroy much of the natural world and where a variety of new diseases are wreaking havoc on people everywhere. In order to find new cures, scientists are exploring the oceans and the creatures there, ravaging life in the ocean as they once ravaged life on land. Another thread in the story involves the development of a radical new procedure that makes it possible to relive another person's memories after their death. The main character, Nithya, is chosen to relive the last 2 years of the life of a scientist named Noor, who has died under strange circumstances. And soon, Nithya is plunged into a much more complicated and complex situation than she could have foreseen. This novella is marvelously rich and layered. It's a love story. It's also a story about scientific ethics, family, grief, and identity, and about the way our memories are deeply embedded in our thoughts and every facet of our existence. One of the story's highlights for me is the absolutely fascinating exploration of a very peculiar and unique species of mind-bending sponge. And I also just love how Ratnakar blends science and fiction in her science fiction. And that was it. That was all the stories I had for this month's roundup. And I hope to see you next